The Diary by Danny Buenaflor. They found a diary under his bed. The morning light which filtered through the canopies of the pines just outside shone through the window. The dust in the air danced in highlighted suspension, then wafted away like a curtain as the sheriff bent down to pick up the book in question. Small, leather-bound, old, and torn at the edges, it smelled like worn leather, coffee, whiskey, and a hint of gunpowder. The sheriff told his young deputy to hold onto it. "Might be a confession in there waiting to be read," he mentioned. The deputy nodded and tucked it into her back pocket, fitting it in rather awkwardly, its outline creating a distinct rectangle on her rear end. "I thought men didn't keep diaries?" asked the deputy as they continued to search the cabin. "Plenty of men do, and we call them journals, not diaries. Women call them diaries." "I fail to see the difference," thought the young deputy. The sheriff continued, "We find it important to record our days and the things we do so that our minds are free to think of other things. Our minds are busy places, deputy." She wanted to laugh at this, but didn't. The sheriff's mind, on average, was no more active than the empty cabin they found themselves in, she wagered. "Sir, remind me what we're looking for again?" she asked. "We're looking for anything we can use to tie him to those bodies by the road. I'm talking a possible weapon, clues to motive. You know, anything out of the ordinary." "I barely know the guy, sir, but I don't think anything about him is ordinary. Do you know where he might be?" "Your guess is as good as mine. We'll probably end up searching the whole damn forest. See anything resembling a weapon?" The young deputy looked around the kitchen, if you could even call it that, scratching her head in confusion. "Honestly, sir, I don't even know what I'm looking for. I didn't recognize the wounds. I mean, their chests were full of holes. Big holes. I have no idea what could have done that. On top of that, this place is surprisingly sparse. There isn't much in the way of personal belongings here. He's got plenty of knives, some shotgun ammo, which would suggest that he's got a gun on him, seeing as the gun is nowhere to be found. But other than that, there's nothing here. Pots, pans, cans? Yeah, I doubt he even came back this way after killing those poor kids." "How do you know it was even him? He's not here. Maybe whatever killed the kids killed him too, or dragged him off someplace." "Whatever? What's that supposed to mean?" "I'm just saying, we have no idea what really happened. I don't see anything here that could have made those holes. Do you, sir?" The sheriff stood, stroking his beard. I'm gonna check the back. Stay here. Maybe crack open that diary, see what kind of man we're dealing with here, and be careful, we don't know when he might come back." She nodded as he left the cabin, sitting at a table and opening the diary. "Okay," she said to herself. First entry. July 11th, 2019, year of our Lord. I find myself in a rather fortuitous situation today. Came across this leather journal at a local shop near the motel. Figured it'll help me organize my thoughts, or at least quell my waking nightmares as I continue this journey. The forest is close now. I can feel it. Gotta find a ride to the cabin tomorrow. Time is short. The visions are more frequent now. I fear I may go mad before I reach the forest, and my journey will have been for naught. Only time will tell what my destiny holds in store for me. H.L. "Clearly not a sane man," said the young deputy to herself. She flipped ahead in the diary and continued reading. September 7th, 2019, year of our Lord. Another week without a sighting. How I wish that these beings would simply alleviate me of my suffering. I can't stand the sight of them, but without them I feel empty. I've glimpsed their world now, a world so vast and of such a grand scale that in comparison my world seems like a toy box for much greater beings. It's clear to me now that the existential annexing of our world is nigh and unavoidable. The horrible, maddening visage of creatures hitherto undreamt of will haunt me no longer. Haunt me no longer because, being as insignificant as I am, the gods of their world will trample my world, and I will cease to be. The peace I so desperately crave may soon be granted. I can only hope that this madness will end, and take us all with it. I can't get them out of my mind. God, the eyes, the legs, all of the legs. H.L. The young deputy began to feel uneasy reading this. "The legs," she said. "All the legs? What the hell am I reading?" The unsettling passages seemed to pull her in closer and closer. Were these the ravings of a madman? The handwritten manifesto of some strange cult? She skipped ahead and read some more. November 20th, 2019, year of our Lord. The time is upon us. I have been calling upon this other dimension for months now, and the time is near. The beings have sent ahead their harbingers, the much smaller but similarly featured beings, like juveniles, and I have seen them with my own eyes. They appear deep within the woods and stand among the trees observing. Silent and deceptively lifeless, the giants have been visiting my forest for days now. I believe the time is near for the great annexing. Their presence is equal parts great comfort and great horror. If only the others on Earth knew of them. The great pestilence, the horde, the world eaters. They're here, and they're hungry. H.L. The young deputy's face contorted in confusion. What was she reading? What madness had befallen this man? He was clearly suffering from schizophrenia or some other similar mental malady, she reasoned. Then, more confusion struck the deputy as she realized something odd. The current date was November 21st, 2019, and up to that point, all of the entries had been in chronological order. The deputy flipped through the remaining pages. There were more entries past the current date. The entry she just read ended on the right page. She flipped to the next. The date read November 21st, 2019. There was but one line. It's not nice to read other people's diaries, Miss Deputy. The deputy dropped the book and leapt out of her chair with a sudden yelp. She covered her mouth in shock. This has to be a joke, she thought. The sheriff must be pranking me. That's when she finally noticed something. Something strange. Something she should have noticed a long time ago. It was dark. Very dark. Sheriff? Called the deputy, but there came no reply. She looked around the cabin and all was unsettlingly quiet. The only sound was the adjusting of the wood flooring beneath her feet. No other sound could be heard, not a single cricket nor faint breeze. She realized that she felt like she was being watched. Drawing her pistol and her flashlight, she slowly made her way out of the cabin. Immediately, she noticed a distinctly different feeling. The air felt cooler, crisper. She was more aware of it, and it affected her breathing, which had been getting faster and shallower by the minute. The trees had no color but the black of silhouette. The sky, however, was not entirely dark, but instead a light gray, as if the world had been lit by some unseen, omnipresent source. The ground was ever so slightly lit, just enough so that she knew where she was going. Against her better judgment, she decided to call out one more time. Sheriff, are you out there? Any remaining courage she had within her had wilted like a dead flower. Tears fell down her face as she struggled to make sense of what was happening. Suddenly, in the distance and out of the darkness, there appeared 3 figures. Every bone in her body told her to turn back, but she moved ever onward, determined to rid herself of the waking nightmare she now found herself in. As she got closer to the figures, it became apparent who they were. On the left and on the right were the bodies of the 2 kids from the road, somehow standing, and in the middle was the sheriff. She got closer to them, pointing her light at them. Her heart sunk when she saw the sheriff. There were several large holes in his chest, and where his eyes and mouth were, there were instead more holes. The sheriff was dead. Yet, like the others, he stood, freely, unsupported by any standing structure. Looking closer, she realized that they were moving slightly, as if they had been standing for a long time and were struggling to stay still. She backed away from them, ready to run to the safety of the cabin. She turned around and started to run, looking at the trees in front of her. They felt imposing, like a horde of giants. She felt like they were watching her. That's when she saw it. One of the trees moved. She stopped in her tracks. A shape she had been staring at was in fact not a tree, but something else. It was as tall as the trees around it, but it had a distinct human shape, although much bulkier. It was still silhouetted in the dark, and as such, she could not make out any features. It suddenly made a sound, like a hiss, reminiscent of the sounds a small predatory mammal might make. The deputy stood frozen, terrified to see what it was that stood before her. She kept her flashlight pointed firmly at the ground. Her mouth tried its best to form the words, "Someone help me," but nothing came out. Suddenly, the still form raised its arm in a lateral motion, and the arms themselves seemed to separate into several long tentacles. The deputy, fearing its sudden movement, raised her flashlight to the beast. That was a mistake. Her gaze immediately went to the undulating tentacle-like arms on either side. On their ends were small suction cups/drill-like mouths that opened and closed in an unnerving manner. As she pointed the light up, she noticed its head, which was remarkably spherical and covered entirely in eyes the size of dinner plates. The eyes, she thought. Then she noticed the third feature of the beast, a thick, undulating coat of fur. It was hard to see, but its seemingly fur-like coat was a light brown tan color, and it seemed to move, like a series of waves on the surface of a body of water. It was only when the young deputy had the courage to look at it longer that she realized something horrifying. The fur wasn't even fur. They were legs. Millions of small, arthropod-like legs. She felt nauseated and threw up, dropping her flashlight and dropping to her knees, sickened by the disgusting sight in front of her. She grabbed the flashlight once more, backing away in terror, but as she moved backwards, she saw that the beast had begun to move toward her, moving slowly and yet somehow catching up to her. It swiftly swung its tentacled arm towards her. The deputy turned and ran away, but as she attempted her escape, she felt an intense pain in the small of her back. She felt herself being lifted off the ground, unable to move, but feeling extreme agony. The beast turned her around to face it as it took another of its tentacles and stuck it into her stomach. She watched in horror as its tentacle burrowed into her. She felt it eating her, as it sucked at her insides, hollowing her out. She yelled out in pain, then silenced herself as it became too painful to scream. The darkness peeled away as the morning light returned. The beast dropped her onto the ground. Managing to look behind her, she noticed that the figures had disappeared, but the sheriff's dead body lay on the ground behind her. She tried to look one last time at the beast, but it was gone. She grimaced in wordless pain and agony as her life quickly faded. The last thing she saw was a man in a dirty coat walking up to her. He had in his hand the diary. He smiled at her and placed his hand on her heart, raising the diary to her face. Tears rolled down her face as she breathed her last.